Who pregnant you? In the heart of a peaceful valley, a small village lay between the hills and a large, sparkling lake. The village was home to many families, each with its own way of life. There were shepherds who lived on the hills, raising sheep and cattle, and fishermen who lived by the lake, casting their nets and tending their boats. Both groups worked hard, but they were different in many ways. The shepherds' lives were simple and quiet, while the fishermen's lives were busy, full of the rhythms of the water. Jonas and Elsie lived on the hills in a small, cozy cottage. Jonas was a strong, quiet man with a deep love for the land and the sheep he cared for. His life was simple, but he found peace in the hills. He spent most of his days on the slopes, watching over the animals and enjoying the wide, open spaces. The hills offered him everything he needed: peace, solitude, and the beauty of nature. However, every now and then, Jonas would wonder what else life had to offer. He didn't know what was missing, but he felt that there might be something more out there. Elsie, his wife, was a kind and hard-working woman. She helped Jonas with the sheep and looked after their home. She enjoyed the simple life, but deep inside, she dreamed of more. She often found herself looking at the distant hills and wondering what lay beyond them. The world outside the hills was unknown to her, but the idea of seeing new places and experiencing new things excited her. By the lake, Benedict and Mira lived a different life. Benedict was a fisherman, known for his strength and skill on the water. Every morning before the sun rose, he set out on his boat to catch fish. His work was hard, but he found comfort in it. The lake was always there, calm in the morning, and bustling with life by midday. Benedict was a man of few words. He did not often share his thoughts, preferring instead to focus on his work. Mira, his wife, was gentle and caring. She spent most of her days at home, cleaning and preparing the fish Benedict brought back. She loved her family and was proud of the work they did, but she often felt like her life was too repetitive. The lake was peaceful, but it had a quiet dullness to it. Mira sometimes wondered if there was more to life than just fishing and caring for the house. One day, Jonas and Elsie decided to visit the village market. The market was a lively place, full of colors and smells, fresh bread, vegetables, and fish. People from all over the village gathered to trade goods and share stories. It was here that the two families met. As they walked through the market, Elsie and Mira exchanged smiles. They had seen each other before, but had never really talked. Today, they had a chance to speak more. "I often wonder what it's like to live by the lake," Elsie said. "The hills are peaceful, but they can be so quiet. I think I would like to experience the lake, see the boats, and fish." Mira smiled back. sometimes feel the same. I wonder what life on the hills is like. The lake is calm, but I think it would be nice to live somewhere quieter, where I could see the animals, feel the fresh air. Jonas overheard their conversation and smiled. What if we swapped lives for a while? He suggested. You could live on the hills, and we could live by the lake. Benedict, who had been standing nearby, thought for a moment. That might be interesting, he said. A change of pace, a chance to see the other side of life. What do you think, Mira? Mira nodded. It could be fun. Maybe we would learn something new. And so, the decision was made. The two families would swap lives for a time. It was a strange idea, but it was also exciting. The women would live in each other's homes, experiencing the life the other had always wondered about. Elsie arrived at Benedict and Mira's home with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. The lake was large and beautiful, but it was so different from the hills. The air smelled of fish and salt water. The sound of the lake's waves was gentle, but it was a sound that Elsie wasn't used to. Benedict showed Elsie around the house, explaining the chores she would need to do. She would help sort the fish, prepare meals, and learn the ways of the fishermen. Elsie was quick to get to work. She found the routine of the lake fascinating, although it was tiring. The mornings were early and the days were long. She had to learn how to clean the fish, prepare them for the market, and help with the boats. At first, Elsie found it all overwhelming. The work was much harder than she had imagined. But she wasn't one to give up easily. She worked alongside Mira, learning how to manage the household and the fish. Slowly, she began to get used to it. She enjoyed the community spirit of the fishermen, how they all worked together, helped each other, and shared everything they had. The mornings by the water were peaceful. Elsie found herself enjoying the quiet moments by the lake. She would watch the fishermen cast their nets, the water rippling around their boats. The sun would rise slowly over the lake, casting a warm, golden light. It was a beautiful sight, one that she had never experienced before. But as the days went on, Elsie began to miss the hills. She missed the wide, open spaces and the simple life. While the lake had its beauty, she longed for the peace that the hills had given her. The noise of the market and the busy life of the fishermen made her feel a little out of place. But she learned to appreciate the life on the lake and the way it brought people together. Mira arrived at Jonas and Elsie's cottage on the hills with a sense of wonder. The hills were so different from the lake. The land was vast, and the air was clean and fresh. Mira looked around in awe as she walked through the fields of sheep. She had never been so far from the lake before, and the stillness of the land was both calming and strange to her. Jonas explained to Mira how to care for the sheep. It was hard work, but Mira was willing to try. The days were slow and quiet. She spent time feeding the sheep, cleaning the barn, and helping with the chores. At first, she found it lonely. There was no busy market, no chatter from the fishermen. The hills were peaceful, but in the beginning, Mira found the quiet unsettling. As the days passed, Mira began to appreciate the stillness. She grew to love the slow pace of life on the hills. The quiet was soothing, and the work, though tiring, gave her a sense of accomplishment. She spent time with the sheep, watching them graze, and she found peace in the wide, open spaces. It was a different kind of peace than she had known by the lake, but it was something she began to cherish. The mornings on the hills were serene. Mira would wake early, the first light of the day casting long shadows over the land. She would walk through the fields, listening to the soft bleating of the sheep. The hills offered a sense of calm that Mira had never known before. The slow, steady rhythm of the day felt natural to her, and she found herself growing attached to the land. But at the same time, she missed the bustling energy of the lake. The market, the fishermen, the daily rush. It was a life she knew well, and it was hard to leave it behind. But as the days went by, Mira began to understand why Jonas and Elsie loved the hills so much. The simple life had its rewards, and she started to see the beauty in it. As time passed, both Elsie and Mira grew more accustomed to their new lives. They had each faced challenges, but they had also learned and grown from them. The experiences of living in a completely different environment were beginning to change them in ways they hadn't expected. Elsie had started to see the value in the work done by the fishermen. The early mornings on the boat, the careful way they handled the fish, and the teamwork it required. There was a sense of pride in the work that Elsie had not fully appreciated at first. She began to enjoy the mornings by the lake, the quiet rhythm of the water, and the sense of purpose that came with the job. But despite this, she still missed the peaceful hills. The long days on the water left her exhausted, and she sometimes found herself longing for the simple life she had left behind. The hills had always been her refuge, a place where she could think clearly, breathe deeply, and enjoy the calm. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate her time by the lake. It was more that she realized the hills were still where her heart belonged. Mira, on the other hand, had started to grow into her role as a shepherd. At first, she had struggled with the loneliness of the hills. She missed the energy of the lake, the sounds of the fishermen, and the busy market. But slowly, the quiet had begun to feel like a gift. Mira learned to appreciate the simple joys of her new life, the wide open spaces, the soft bleating of the sheep, and the peaceful rhythm of the day. The hard work on the hills gave her a sense of accomplishment. She spent hours taking care of the animals, ensuring they were safe and healthy. The time alone allowed her to reflect on her life, and she found that the stillness helped her think more clearly. As much as she missed the market and the activity of the lake, she began to feel a deep connection to the land, to the rhythm of nature that surrounded her. Still, Mira couldn't help but feel conflicted. There were moments when she longed for the lively conversations at the market, the buzz of activity that came with living by the lake. She wondered if she could ever be truly content living on the hills, so far from everything she had known. As the weeks turned into months, both Elsie and Mira found themselves expecting children. The news was a surprise to both women, but it also brought them closer to the reality of their situation. They each had to think about what kind of future they wanted for their children, and what kind of environment would be best for raising them. Elsie, in her time by the lake, had come to appreciate the strong sense of community among the fishermen. There was something comforting about knowing that people worked together to support one another. She felt a strong connection to the families by the lake and began to imagine raising her child in this environment. She thought about how the child would grow up around the lake, learning from the fishermen and feeling the pulse of the water beneath their feet. At the same time, Elsie still longed for the hills. She wanted her child to experience the peace of the land, the wide open spaces, and the quiet beauty that had always filled her heart. She thought about combining the best of both worlds, raising her child near the water, but spending time in the hills, letting them grow up with the balance of both environments. Mira, too, found herself thinking about the future. She knew that raising a child on the hills would be very different from raising one by the lake. The quiet of the hills would be perfect for a child to grow up with peace and calm. But Mira worried that her child might miss the energy of the lake, the lively market, and the constant movement of the fishermen. She began to wonder if it would be possible to raise a child in a way that combined both worlds. At the same time, Mira also realized that there were things about the hills that she loved. The simplicity, the connection to nature, and the feeling of peace had become important to her. She wondered if, perhaps, her child would find a way to appreciate both the quiet of the hills and the energy of the lake. After several months, it was time for both women to return to their homes. Their time apart had been eye-opening, and they were both changed by the experience. They had learned new things, grown stronger, and begun to see their lives through a different lens. But now, it was time to go back. Elsie returned to the hills with a mix of emotions. On the one hand, she was glad to be home. The hills had always been her sanctuary, and she felt the peace settle into her heart as she walked through the familiar fields. But on the other hand, she couldn't forget the sense of community and purpose she had found by the lake. The fisherman's way of life had left an impression on her, and she wondered if there might be a way to bring some of that to the hills. Mira, too, returned to the lake with mixed feelings. The hills had changed her, and she found herself thinking differently about her life. The quiet, the work, the simplicity, it had all taught her valuable lessons. But returning to the lake brought back the rhythm of life she had always known. The bustle of the market, the fishermen working together, the sound of the water. It all felt comforting and familiar. But as the days passed, both women began to realize that the changes they had gone through were not as simple as they had hoped. The men, Jonas and Benedict, were struggling too. Both had seen their own lives from a new perspective and found that what they had once accepted as normal was no longer enough. They too were restless, longing for something more. The days that followed their return were full of tension. Jonas and Benedict found it difficult to adjust back to the way things had been. Both men had spent time thinking about their lives and what they wanted from them. The work they had done for so many years no longer felt fulfilling in the same way. They had seen the other side of life, the peaceful hills, the busy lake, and now they were unsure how to feel content again. Elsie and Mira could see the change in their husbands. The men had become distant, distracted, and they weren't as interested in the things that once brought them joy. The tension between the two couples began to grow, and soon it was clear that they needed time to figure things out. Elsie and Mira, too, felt the strain. They had changed in ways they hadn't expected, and now they were unsure how to move forward. Both women missed the life they had left behind, but they also felt that they could never go back to how things were before. They had learned too much, grown too much. There was no way to turn back the clock. After much discussion and tension, both couples decided to take time apart. It was a difficult decision, but they realized it was the only way to truly understand what they wanted from their lives. They would live separately for a while, each focusing on their own family, working through their feelings, and trying to figure out what kind of future they wanted. The time apart was hard, but it was also necessary. Both couples needed to grow, to reflect, and to come to terms with their new lives. The separation allowed them to see the changes that had happened within them and how they could build a new future. Years passed, and the children grew. Elsie and Jonas continued to live on the hills, while Benedict and Mira remained by the lake. Though they missed each other, they had found peace in their own lives. Each family had discovered a new sense of understanding, and each member had learned something important about themselves. One day, when their children were old enough, fate brought the two families back together at the market. The years of separation had allowed them to grow, to learn, and to find new ways to live their lives. Jonas and Benedict, now older and wiser, saw each other in a new light. They talked about their lives, their families, and the lessons they had learned. This time, when they spoke, there was no tension, no frustration. They were both at peace with their lives, and they understood each other in a way they hadn't before. They realized that they had both grown, changed, and learned from their time apart. And so, the two families decided to build a new future together, not to return to their old lives, but to combine what they had learned and create something new. The peaceful hills and the busy lake could now exist side by side, and both families were ready to face the future